seems very quiet, so I assume we should begin. My name is Gary Hepburn. I'm the Dean of Extended Education at the University of Manitoba, and I'm moderating a respondent panel. Now, it's a student respondent panel. Some students are just that. Students are in a student role right now. Some of our members are both working and students at the same time, and some have recently been students. The format that we're going to use in responses is each panelist will get about 5 minutes to speak, and I've told them that if they're a little under 5 minutes, that's okay. If they're 5 minutes, great. And if they get too far over, I'll begin to wave at them a little bit to try to encourage them to wrap it up. Once those are complete, we have 20 minutes of free-for-all questioning. So members of the audience can ask questions, the panelists can ask questions, and Alec can ask questions as well at that time. So quite open, and that will be for about 20 minutes, and then each panelist will get 2 minutes to wrap up. So, getting right underway. Our first respondent is Ben Echo. Ben is a researcher and expert in education, ICTs, media, internet, and technology policy, and a PhD student at the University of Manitoba. His research interests are in exploring the nexus of globalization, post-secondary, and adult education, culture, and technology. He's a program director and continuing education instructor, designing exciting business, technology, social science programs, while he teaches emerging technologies, mobile learning, open education, resources, and digital literacy course. Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for that introduction. Sometimes I wonder where it's actually represented in the bio. But Alec, I thought you had a very good presentation this morning. Thank you very much for it. It brings to mind a number of issues, then four areas that I would like to talk about in response to your comment this morning. One is the disconnect of culture and education. And given that culture comes, front and center in my research, I can relate to that. And that's the fact that, and you talk about it, we come from an individual type of culture in the West, whereas my background and where I come from in Africa looks at things more collaboratively and collectively. And I would associate those sort of collaborative and familial type culture to what subsists in perhaps the First Nations communities in Canada. I think that there is an absence of community in how we perceive of education today, and there's an absence of community in how technology gets introduced into education. And the individuality of technology use within that context sort of begins to have that negative impact or effect on how we connect and collaborate together. I'll leave that discourse on culture there, but right there in the midst of it is that whole concept of how community and the cultural underlying of our being sort of translates to our use of technology within the educational space. The second point I think I'd like to reflect on is personal learning networks, and you talk about that. In one of the classes that I teach, Emerging Technologies for Learning, last week we had a discussion around personal learning networks. Now, most adults come into this class thinking it's a course on technology and therefore you would show me how to use technology. But we pull away from the tools themselves to thinking about the philosophies underlying technology itself and how you assess or think about the way you learn, how you're guided by your own personal being and the relationships that you have. And when we came to the point of thinking about your learning networks, all the students in the class thought the tools that we use to access content was all that was important to me. Whereas when they began to really think about it, they started seeing how the people that surrounded them was important to learning. So they would talk about their daughters, for instance, and how that child was able to help them see a different piece of technology. And I think not just technology, but different piece of existence, a different piece of themselves. And the fact that they're beginning to see that there is a need to expand my learning network was a point in that lesson. Sometimes we do not think about how our networks actually influence how we learn and how we grow. We think about ourselves in that same cultural, individual context, and that affects how we see our learning and growth. And if you don't see yourself situated in a state where you're learning connectedly and in relations with other people, there is no way as educators we will be able to pass that on to our students. I think inherently we pass a concept of individuality when we pass on learning and lessons to our students in the way we design our assignments, in the way the class is structured, and a whole lot of things. Whereas when we think about people and the connectedness of learning, we actually do more. A third place that I'd like to, point I'd like to make in response to your comment, Alex, is the changes to our personal habits. I think that our personal habit of not conducting an assessment of our learning, or not even thinking about the way we think about our learning, has a negative impact on how we create connectedness in this space. And so sometimes as academics we want to step back and actually think about that. How do we learn, and how are we thinking about the way we think about our learning? I've had this exercise conducted in one of my classes, and I've had students say metacognitive practices it's very strange to me. I mean, I know about it, but I haven't quite applied it to myself as an instructor or an educator in the classroom. I would rather pass it on to my students and have them do that. And so, as in academics, stepping back and thinking about our own learning is a way that will help us change our personal habits. But more importantly to me, I think, is how connectedness doesn't just sit within the Canadian landscape. I think connectedness is about connection globally. And my research interest in terms of global connections is what this is all about. I was fortunate to be sitting in a conference some 4 or 5 years ago in Azerbaijan, Baku, where students that were brought to the conference, a global conference on technology policy, internet policy. Students were brought in by UNESCO into the conference. And one of the things that I heard a 15-year-old kid say was that my identity has changed. My citizenship has changed. I'm no longer an Australian or a Canadian. I'm more of a global citizen. And that change in citizenship shows how they are constantly connected. And he made a certain statement that will stay with me for a long time. He said even when he's not attempting to stay connected, he is connected. Because his phone actually says he's awake somewhere, and someone can actually speak to him, and when he gets connected, when he wakes up, he can connect in person. But that says points a lesson to us, and it indicates something that, the separation of our identity as online people, what I'll call our online persona, and our physical person. And you'd hammer a lot about that. When the Vancouver riots happened, we separated, or the people that were there separated their personal, their real identity or their physical identity from their online persona. And what we're beginning to see is a merge of these two identities. It is coming together. The lines that separate them no longer exist. And so what we do in the online space becomes who we are in real life, and vice versa. And that cross-connect between both worlds is something we should begin to understand as educators. I think that's where the crux of the argument is, especially when we talk with our students, that we haven't quite conceptualized the shift from one world to the other. As academics, as much as we should, we still want to keep them separate. And I'll hear instructors in my class, for instance, say, I keep separate Facebook accounts, I keep dual profiles, and they don't quite connect. But sometimes you'll hear them also say, I've posted a couple times the same post on both profiles. And so, you're beginning to wonder where the connection or the separation really exists. I think with that comment, I'll stop for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Our next respondent is Crystal Matoya. Crystal Montoya is enrolled with the University of Regina through the Faculty of Continuing Education. Crystal moved to Regina in 2007 from Alberta and is pursuing further education mid-career. In an attempt to create a work-life balance, Crystal has chosen to take classes online during the evenings.
Thank you, Alex, for your presentation and the cat videos. Always good, but cat philosophy there. Yeah. I guess my responses would be more directed at my personal experiences as an individual that is pursuing a varied form of education. So I was actually taking art classes, like studio-based art classes. It's a very different format to approach in an online manner. And I had different responses to it. So my personality, I would be more of an introvert person, and I liked the fact that I could work in my own space, in my own comfort area, to produce articles or materials that I appreciated. I like the autonomy of it, but in commentary to the presentation, there's that contrast between the community that's based in a virtual world and having dialogue, having connection, having the accessibility to acquire the education that you're looking for versus the capacity to produce what you're trying to learn. I found it interesting to think of the context of the conversation you can have when it becomes limitless, and the experiences and the opportunity to kind of learn and engage when you're not just limited to like 10 people around you, but an entire community in a virtual level, and like different cultures, different areas, different realms. Like that kind of intrigued me in terms of that concept. Also, another thing I really appreciated was the flexibility of it as an individual that is pursuing online. I could access classes all over that may meet what I'm looking to find that I might not find locally. And there could be like this great connection that I could take a course here and find what I'm looking for in terms of building what I want to. Well, as a person that works both sides as you, it's very difficult to come to a class. And there's another thing that I was kind of evaluating internally was the comment that in terms of accessibility that the divide would be over the richer people receiving the opportunity to go to the online class, where there's the people that may not be able to afford it would go to, in class, people that can't afford to go to the online class. So I was like wondering what the quality difference is between the materials received in course structure versus online. And considering that most courses that I've attended to in person in evenings use media all the time to support lectures, I'm wondering really what the difference is in that. And overall, I really appreciated the opportunity to take it online, and I look forward to more classes being offered that way and greater integration between universities.
Our next speaker, and just before we get to that, I just, we'll take a point of privilege here and mention the cat videos. It really struck me. I was living in Trinidad at the time, and it was my children who brought their iPads with the cat videos, and they even sorted out how to put the music into the home entertainment system, which really drove me crazy, I must say. So it was a bit of a flashback when I heard the music. But quite an interesting thing. So back to business. Our next speaker is Cohere. Cohere recently completed her doctorate in September 2013 in education at York University. Her dissertation focused on e-learning accessibility in higher education. Cohere is currently an instructor with the Access and Aboriginal Focus Programs of Extended Education at the University of Manitoba. In this role, she provides academic support to undergraduate students who are pursuing careers in professional healthcare fields. Prior to this appointment, Cohere was an instructor in the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, a sessional instructor in the Department of Chemistry and Biology at Ryerson University, and an instructor in the Department of Microbiology at the University of Manitoba. Over to you, Cohere.
Thank you for that excellent keynote talk. When we met just before you gave your presentation and you asked me what was my area, and I said e-learning accessibility. And you said, oh, I'm not going to really talk about that. So you joked at, I said, oh, are you going to give me something to work with? Well, most certainly there's lots to work with here, and lots of really, really great sort of themes and really important areas that we should continue to talk about. A few of the themes that were touched on in Alex's presentation that really sort of resonated with me were those that were related to access, equity, and privilege. So certainly I'm very much in favor of using learning technologies or various tools as learning technologies. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. But oftentimes when I'm attending, when I'm amongst this sort of company or attending these types of talks, sometimes I feel a little bit like a fish out of water, because I always feel a little bit hesitant, or I always feel that, okay, let's proceed with caution here. There's so many neat and amazing things that we can do with technologies to support our teaching and learning. But I really always feel that I always want to move slowly and think about, why are we using technology here? What technology should we use? And how should we use them? And certainly Alec presented a lot of important points in terms of why this is something that we should continue to pursue, such as the importance of developing networks, recognizing the strengths of weak ties, facilitating participatory culture. So we know that our students they're no longer just consumers of information, they're now producers of information. So how do we support that? And how do we help to promote the development of new digital literacy skills? But Alec also acknowledged that with more and more content out there, we end up with some new challenges. And I'd really like to emphasize as well that with more and more tools out there that we can draw on, while it's great to get really excited about it, and I do get really excited about it, but it's important to recognize that there can be new challenges that arise as well. And I think it's important that we think about that as we move forward, and that's why I say to sort of proceed with caution. And what really brought me here in terms of having a really keen interest in learning technologies is because e-learning represents so many possibilities, right? There's so many different things, new and exciting things, and we just got a taste of just a few things from this talk this morning about what we can do with learning technologies. And I think it's great that using learning technologies can help to, in many ways, remove barriers that might be present in a brick-and-mortar setting. So for Crystal, who says she's a bit of an introvert, she likes the idea that she can work in her own space. That's great, and that's something that her e-learning has come to facilitate. So why do I say proceed with caution? Well, it's important to recognize that when we do something new and we're using new tools to facilitate our teaching, there can be new barriers and new things that we need to consider to make sure that we're not disadvantaging students in different ways as a result of doing something different. And I thought it was interesting, one of the papers that Alec talked briefly about Indigenous communities and post-secondary distance education. I was reading that off the plane on the way here, so it was interesting because there was talk about video conferencing to bring the students together with the instructor who was at a remote location. So that's great, but it didn't actually work so well because there wasn't a robust enough signal. So the idea was great, but in a sense, you could say that it sort of, I don't know if disabling is the right word here, but the students had difficulty interacting with the instructor because of that difficulty with the technology. So again, but it could be a wonderful thing, as Ben talked about, somehow we feel as though we might lose a sense of community when we start to use a lot of technologies in our education. So absolutely, video conferencing or these sorts of things can be great, but I also want to, again, to sort of caution that we think it through, all the way through. So not to sound doom and gloom, again, I think this is all really exciting stuff to talk about, but I like to suggest that we can think about this as in a positive perspective. So let's recognize that our students are diverse. Our students come with particular characteristics, different learning needs and preferences. Let's think about that positively, and let's allow that diversity to help drive the innovation that we apply to our classrooms. So let's think about, not only what can we use and what can we do, but who are we doing it for, and how should we best do that in order to best serve our students. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Our next speaker is Eliza Wright. Eliza Wright is a recent graduate from the University of Regina and obtained a major in English. She began full-time employment with the government of Saskatchewan in 2013 and required flexible class hours to accommodate her work week. Online classes allowed her to complete her degree while entering into the workforce. Eliza.
Thank you, Alex. That was a very interesting presentation. I'm going to be kind of going a bit off what you just talked about. I'll be talking a bit the other way, though. I am very much for online learning. I think the future of education is essentially going to end up online. And whether it's a slow transition to complete online classes or just including more online processes inside the classroom. I know I did take a class here that was recorded for an out-of-town community, so I thought that was very interesting that we have the ability now to get physical classes kind of online out to other schools. When I was in university, I enjoyed the in-university classes. However, once I started working, like Crystal mentioned, it is very hard to make it to classes in the university. During the work week, you don't have time to do that, so I took a few evening online classes. And this is kind of the individual achievement line of things. Students are different types of learners. You have people who learn audioly, visually, and I believe the online classes allow students to learn in a way that they need. You can take the time to read. I know the art class that I was in had a video option as well, so you had that option to either read the textbook material that was online, or you could watch the videos, replay them, learn the way that you needed to learn. I think this creates amazing access for students who don't have that ability to learn the way that they need to in a classroom setting. I guess apart from the cat videos, which we all see today, the other thing that struck me as interesting and stood out was the free of charge and affordable comments that were up there, which I'm sure the rest of the students can relate to. I think it's very interesting that the online course could essentially allow people who can't afford to come to have the university experience to still obtain education online. And I mean, there is the argument that this will create an absence of community. However, I think in the future of education, of online education, we have the ability to create a better sense of community, even through online courses, even though people aren't face-to-face communicating. I think we will definitely head in that direction, and it'll be a lot easier to communicate with people all over the world.
Thank you, Eliza. Now, our last speaker is Max Binday, and Max has assisted me a little bit with this introduction, as you're going to see. Max Binday is Nuhayao, that means Cree, from Sweetgrass First Nation, and is serving his second term as president of the University of Saskatchewan Students' Union, representing 18,000 undergraduate students. Most of his work focuses on both the student and First Nations movements, and he finds inspiration within them. He is committed to increasing access to post-secondary education for traditionally underrepresented groups such as refugee communities, youth in care, first-generation learners, and Indigenous peoples. He is currently pursuing a Bachelor of Arts degree, majoring in political studies at the University of Saskatchewan, and has also studied at the University of Nordland in Bodø, Norway. I didn't worry about that word, actually. When Max isn't rabble-rousing, you can find him learning Nuhe Wei Win, that's Cree language, tweeting and laughing at his own jokes.
Thank you so much. Dwell kakiao nasigasun kiskaupi simuasis. Egwa wikas lutinia dwell neheawaski egwa michifaski oda. Good morning, everybody. And no, congratulations, Gary, the moderator. You know, that was perfect pronunciation. This guy, we're living the treaty relationship right now. Good. You know, I feel a little bit in awe right now, sitting and responding to Alex's presentation. This guy has 66,000 Twitter followers. Holy smokes. And one, I just followed him. So that's good.
I followed you back.
Yeah, hey, nice. So as you heard in my bio, I spend a lot of my time within my job and outside of my job focusing on access, focusing on diversity and bringing into our academies traditionally underrepresented groups, the voices that we're missing from our universities. And, I see a lot of what Alec is talking about, complementing that work. I ran my campaign the first time around on open textbooks, open educational resources, and breaking down this barrier that so many students talk about when they come to university, right? The cost of their textbooks, $1,000, they use it for one class for figure 9.2, a little graph that goes like this, and that's it. That's all they use their textbook for. So, I won that election. I was a little bit surprised, right? And now I had the big task of working on open educational resources, trying to make undergraduate students talk about open educational resources. What are those? Creative Commons MOOC? What? While they were trying to get to class, right? And what Alex is talking about, participatory culture. This fits right in. We had students getting together in groups, the students talking about the future of educational resources, the future of knowledge distribution. And we talked about what that meant and what that looked like for us. We talked about what wasn't useful, maybe those examples from textbooks, downtown Toronto, the math textbook that talks about, if you leave at Yonge Street and want to go to Dundas, but you have to stop at, whatever, that doesn't resonate for us. That doesn't really resonate for the kid from Aberdeen, Saskatchewan, or Black Lake way up in the north. So it's talking about how we can as students participate in what we're learning, in what we're being taught, and how we can engage our instructors in that conversation. So I really appreciate that part of the presentation. And I really believe there is no better place than Saskatchewan to begin talking about open educational resources and these sorts of things. We recently had the universities and the province commit to working on this issue. They signed an MOU with BC and Alberta, so there is movement on this issue. But we have to be realistic. We're not going to get every class to adopt an open textbook. Not every student is going to be able to benefit from this. But when we're talking about diversity, when we're talking about why that community, why those First Nations students didn't feel connected, didn't feel, what was the word, didn't feel, they were feeling lost, they were feeling alone, right? In talking to a screen, right? In learning from somebody from far away that they've never met. Why is that? Why isn't that working for them? Why can't they succeed? Why aren't they succeeding in that context? Maybe it's about relationships. Maybe because that teacher on the TV hasn't sat down with the community. Maybe it's because they've never had bannock and tea. Maybe it's because they don't know anything about them except for that hour that they see them, and then they're gone. They're on to different things. So these are all very important aspects of the conversation. And how can we make those learners succeed? How do we challenge ourselves in our work, in our jobs, in our lives, to help see these marginalized communities succeed in less than ideal situations? So maybe I'll stop there, and we can start asking questions.
Thank you, Max. Now we have about 20 minutes for questions, and everybody's eligible, all of you, the panelists. Alec is eligible, and I'm not sure if we're using another microphone for them, or just Well, we can't really take this microphone too far, so I think we'll just ask you if you're, especially if you're near the back, to just try to project as best you can. So would anyone like to begin?
I'll ask a question. Largely for Max, and I'll speak loud enough, but Max, what have you seen as the biggest roadblock in adoption of OER at the locally Regina? Both on the students, maybe, and the instructors.
Sure. That's a really great question. I have to, first acknowledge that I don't have all the answers. I'm just one person, one piece in a lot of work that's gone on in Saskatchewan. I should have said that before. But I like to sound important sometimes. So, the biggest thing I found challenging with talking about open textbooks, it's the faculty. Are there any faculty in the room?
Me.
Some of my best friends are faculty, I promise. but they're busy. They have research to do. They have classes to teach. They don't have a lot of extra time. So when they hear the student union president come knocking at their door and saying, "Hey, do you want to write a textbook?" Ooh, wasn't a lot of uptake there. They often, surprisingly, am I right? But often faculty have never heard of an open textbook, or if they have, the experience with it hasn't been a great one. There's questions about quality. There's questions about, feasibility. There's questions about, the one that they're using right now is from a friend or somebody they know, or they wrote a chapter in it, which is fine and fair, and it's a reality of our universities, right? So those are some of the faculty challenges. With students, it's getting them engaged, because again, students are busy. They have 10 assignments to write. They have parties to go to, right? They're already volunteering their time and in so many other places. And holy smokes, I have to say, open educational resources aren't very sexy. Do you know what I mean? And that's they aren't supposed to be, really. But when we're talking about getting students engaged heavily, that plays a factor sometimes. So we do have a lot of students at the University of Saskatchewan who are engaged in this, who are involved in this, who believe that open education resources, open textbooks are the way to go. But unfortunately, for now at least, that is very much a minority of the student population. For now.
I make a comment on that too. I find it, when you're saying writing a whole book, that's a daunting process that many people get that later in their career. I think we need to move away from being an individual process, and whether it is a piece where you have chapters. Also, I because of the way we set up our merit and our incentives for faculty, it's running around to get what you need to do for the for the publication or the standing, the competition between one institution and the other. I would love to see us do something top down, where if there's a conference, if there's a grant, if there's an initiative, you'll see faculty move really fast to be part of that grant, to be part of that publication coming out, those types of things. So how do we get that kind of eagerness moved over to open textbooks? And I think it needs to be where it's a call and it's going to be targeted right in your backyard, right in the course that you're teaching, and make it regional. So Saskatchewan, we're going to have a collaborative open textbook in Psychology 100. Instructors step forward to write. I think you'll see people jump because it's going to be, being part of an initiative, and you need to be the instructor that's the one who didn't jump. Your students will hate you. So I think we need to think about how we look at our incentive models.
We'll be I'll put in a plug for my session tomorrow because I'm from British Columbia, working on the open textbook project there. We'll be talking about some of these issues tomorrow in that session too that Max raises. And I should say that there are not many faculty that are actually writing a textbook from scratch by themselves. In British Columbia, what we've done is we've worked on collaborative models of textbook production and taking already existing textbooks that may be 70%, 80% of the way there, and working with small groups of faculty and collaborative events to customize those resources to meet their specific learning needs, and that's worked out really well for us.
Yes.
So just related to that, building on those questions of the open textbooks, what has been, how much of a barrier is the fact that so many textbook companies now have these major packages that go around the textbook and all these great PowerPoint resources and multimedia things, and that people have bought into it and built their classes around it? You're laughing, Matt, so go ahead.
That's the thing nobody wants to say, right? That's the part that the professors don't want to talk about when I go to their offices. There's test banks, there's slides, there's, you know, so many things that come with the textbook now. It's not just the textbook. The publishers have done such a good job at making themselves, you know, an invaluable resource to professors. So that's such a major barrier, actually. But you know, that isn't to say that we haven't been making progress, and that isn't to say that means that no professor will ever adopt an open textbook. We just had a professor at the University of Saskatchewan adopt an open textbook, so we're seeing success. And you know, not too long ago, I had a visit in my office from a representative from a publishing company. I'm not going to say who tried to sort of persuade me to work with them instead of open textbooks. We can find a deal, you know, we're friends, hey? So the work that we're doing, the progress that we're making is getting attention of the big dogs, right? We're starting to be, I don't want to say a threat, but we're starting to make an impact. And that's good. I like to keep people on their toes, so that's good. We're seeing progress, but absolutely, those resources, holy smokes, it's hard to pull professors away from those sometimes.
Okay, so if I can add, I will also talk this afternoon about exactly those resources, how we can find some ways to produce all those resources. It's not just the textbook.
Why do we need to produce them?
I
Add a hashtag, let the students create those resources as part of what
You
they're
could.
doing. We need to start questioning this hierarchical sort of top-down model to...
It depends what resources may be. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So
we have a ton of slide decks and things created by community.
So it's, just dealing with the concept of open, my question for you is, at the University of Regina, Alex brought this up about the LMS versus personal learning network. So we use Moodle, LMS here, as many institutions use Moodle or other LMSs. So from a student perspective, this is something that I grapple with a lot in terms of private versus public ideas. So if we're building, using the LMS tools like for example, in cloud, using blogs and forums to discuss versus students going out and setting up their own WordPress blog or using their own wiki or using Twitter and those sorts of things, which are available after the course. What I'm wondering from your point of view, would that, if a course was open versus all being an LMS, would that change your view on whether or not you want to take an online course? How do you feel about that private versus public sort of notion?
I can offer a very brief comment to that, and maybe others would like to add to it, but this whole idea of your personal identity versus your professional identity, or if you're a student, I guess you can say your academic identity, is something that I've given a lot of thought to, and I think Ben spoke nicely to this initially, talking about, and Alec as well, that, is it appropriate to think of these as distinct entities? Yet I have to admit I'm one who does feel a little bit like I want to hang on to keeping those entities separate. And I can give you an example from my graduate work where I've taken a course on educational technologies, and the instructor set up a Facebook group that we were all required to join, and we had to engage in discussions there. And most of the people thought it was great that they could go to Facebook, while they're doing their coursework. Personally, I didn't like it at all. Part of it for logistics, because the Facebook discussions weren't threaded, and it really drove me nuts trying to have a conversation, whereas what's in the LMS was designed for education and for those purposes. So that's something that I think about as an instructor in terms of, you know, I don't want to ask my students to do something that they may or may not be comfortable with, and perhaps, you know, some tools are just better suited to what we want to use them for. So again, thinking about why we're using what we're using and whether it fits those purposes. But I can say that as a student, I have felt uncomfortable, and I would much prefer to work within the LMS. But again, maybe I need the best teacher to take me outside of my comfort zone and show me how some of these other tools can work as well.
Anybody else on the Ben? Ben and then out. So let's come from the back of the fire.
I'll just pick one or maybe a couple comments on this. I think with respect to tools, and a part of my master's research sort of touched on that as well, that the LMS itself provides a certain function. And that's, if you wanted to simplify it, it's a centralizing function. Pretty much brings everything together. Brings the students together, the instructors, and that's probably the only good thing that you might be able to find in an LMS. Beyond that, you begin to look at all the tools around the ecosystem that would facilitate learning. And most of these do not reside within the LMS itself. And if academics or school administration will actually begin to think about the tools, the LMS, you know, in this form, we may begin to see the possibilities that other tools provide, and be able to explore them. Of course, there are policy challenges, and some of those policy challenges lie with where content resides and who has rights to the content and all of those things. And what technology does today is makes us think about how this content is structured and where it is placed, and how this rights and access to this should be thought about. And I think that we're not where we are yet in terms of thinking about it. I think we're still constrained within the present model of ownership and restriction of closeness to academics that sort of restricts knowledge within, you know, to a certain confined space. Whereas there's quite a whole lot that exists outside of that space. And so when you talk about models like Twitter creating new content, that becomes an example of how we can look externally to find other means by which we can complement what we have within the very centralizing function that LMSs provide.
Just to add to that comment on public versus private, I see, you know, Greg, you're asking, you know, which one do we prefer, which one do we use, and I think it's both. I think we have to provide spaces for students to deal with controversial issues. Katya's PhD is actually looking at troubling knowledge, having students deal with anti-oppressive or discuss anti-oppressive education, anti-racist education. So in those particular spaces, it's really difficult to talk about things that are troubling, I guess, in that perspective. And I think it's really, you know, difficult to put your perspective up there. But I think at the same time, having students develop their profiles. So if we think about what we're developing students for in the world that we're developing them for, I'd love to see you know, students have the ability at least to have some open spaces to start developing their identity. So when they do go out there, like if we silo individuals within an academic institution, we're only providing one aspect of who they will be or what perspective. So if we help to nurture their identities in these spaces, help them to provide with wise choices around these spaces, to look at the concept that we're talking about in K-12 education is digital citizenship. So how do we, you know, extend that particular model to students in undergraduate and graduate programs who are expected to become a bit more open, I guess, in some spaces. And I think that it actually even goes back to, you know, some of the confines and the barriers to having students or academics take on open textbook projects. It's very much about a mindset. For instance, I meet many faculty who are not willing to give their stuff away. I mean, that's just a particular position that they have, that they